The most extreme mark from Lydia Bay was not at sea level. It was 1,720 feet up the side of a mountain. It happened in Lydia Bay, a narrow, T-shaped fjord on Alaska's coast. At its head, steep rock walls rise above deep water. On the evening of July 9, 1958, 3 fishing boats were sheltering near the outer bay. Within minutes, the landscape itself would be redrawn. At about 10:16 that night, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake ruptured the Fairweather Fault. The shaking triggered avalanches across the surrounding mountains. Near Gilbert Inlet, at the head of the bay, an enormous mass of rock broke loose from a steep slope. Roughly 30 million cubic meters of rock plunged toward the water. That impact was the crucial difference. This was not an ordinary ocean-wide tsunami created by the seafloor lifting over a huge area. The landslide struck a confined inlet almost like a piston. Water had nowhere easy to escape. It was forced outward, upward, and across the narrow basin with extraordinary violence. The famous number from Lydia Bay is 1,720 feet, endobebat, or about 524 meters, but that number is often misunderstood. It was not the height of a single vertical wall of water moving through the entire bay. It was the maximum run-up, the highest elevation reached by rushing water on the slope directly opposite the landslide. The evidence was written onto the mountain. Forest below, a sharp trim line had been stripped away. Trees, soil, and loose material vanished from the slope, exposing bare ground far above the shoreline. Across much of the bay, the surge tore through coastal forest and carried debris into the water. For the people on the fishing boats, the event unfolded almost immediately. Howard Ulrich and his 7-year-old son were aboard the Idri. After the earthquake began, Ulrich saw avalanches and then heard a tremendous crash from the head of the bay. Within minutes, a wave was moving toward them. The Idri could not simply flee. Its anchor was stuck. Ulrich let out the remaining chain and started the engine. Near Sonoetaf Island, the wave wrapped around the terrain. When it reached the Idri, the boat climbed the steep face. The anchor chain snapped, and the vessel made it through the wave. Another boat, the Badger, was carried over low chassis spit and wrecked on the ocean side. Bill and Vivian Swanson escaped in a small skiff and were rescued about 2 hours later. The third boat, the Sunmore, disappeared. It had been making for the bay's entrance as the wave moved through the outer bay. The Wagners aboard were never found. In total, 2 people died in Lydia Bay. When the water settled, the bay looked transformed. Trees had been erased from huge sections of shoreline. A cabin on Sonoetaf Island was gone. The lighthouse at Harbor Point had vanished. Rafts of logs covered parts of the water. The destruction drew U.S. Geological Survey geologist Don Miller, who already knew Lydia Bay was unusual. Older trim lines showed that giant waves had struck the bay before. A well-documented wave in 1936 had torn forest from slopes hundreds of feet above sea level. What Miller saw after 1958 seemed almost impossible. He measured the highest trim line at 1,720 feet. Some scientists initially doubted that water could have reached so high, but fallen trees, transported debris, and the continuous pattern of stripped vegetation pointed to a gigantic wave, not simply a landslide reaching the opposite slope. The remaining question was how the earthquake produced it. Early ideas focused on fault movement, but the geometry pointed back toward Gilbert Inlet. Physical experiments showed that a sufficiently fast landslide entering confined water could reproduce extreme run-up. Modern numerical models have also recreated the broad flooding pattern and the extraordinary climb up the opposite slope. Researchers still study exactly how the slide, water, air, glacier, and submerged sediments interacted during those first seconds. And some details remain debated. But the central mechanism is clear. An earthquake destabilized a mountainside. The collapse slammed into a narrow inlet, and the impact converted enormous gravitational energy into a local tsunami. That explains another strange fact. The event was catastrophic inside the fjord, yet it did not become a transoceanic disaster. Landslide tsunamis can be brutally powerful near their source while losing energy rapidly as they move away from the confined geometry that helped create them. Lydia Bay remains a warning written into the landscape. The record is not a mythical wall of water 1,720 feet tall as it crossed the bay. It only had to reach that height once, and the mountainside still carries the evidence.